Good evening and welcome. Thank you all for having come through the rain to listen to this wonderful conversation that I am so very much looking forward to with my dear friend Shashi, who I've known for some years. And given the fact that she's already so well known and famous in the world of literature, I don't think I need to talk too much about the fact, except to say that she has, and it's very difficult to remember the data by heart, but 11 novels, 2 crime novellas, and a number of short story collections, a book of essays, 4 children's books, and 3 of her novels have received awards, most notably the Sahitya Academy Award for That Long Silence. She's also had a number of works of translation from Kannada and Marathi into English, and a lot of her work has also been translated in Indian and European languages. This afternoon, we're going to chat about a series of things from Sashi's work, the way she started, and then sort of meander along talking about other writers' influences and the role of writing today. Does that sound good to you, Shashi?
Sure, absolutely.
So to start at the very beginning, can you please share with us a little bit about when that impetus of perhaps knowing or starting to write started?
I think I started to write even before I knew I wanted to write. I think it was stored within me for years. I was a girl who sort of spoke to myself in my own head all the time. There was this conversation going on in my head with all kinds of people. I had an imaginary friend, and a lot of things which I thought and felt were there. So I think ultimately it just came out through my pen. There was a point when it seemed that I had to write because I was sort of bursting with it, I think. So it had to come out, and surprisingly, I was told, I remember reading one or two saying that once a woman has a children, she can do nothing, no intelligence at all. And I was so petrified when I got my kids. I said, oh my God, all my life I'm not going to be able to do anything intelligent. And then I began to write. So, I was so happy to prove him wrong. But it was an outpouring more than anything else.
In this new book, Subversions, if y'all haven't bought a copy, I urge you to. It's a collection of very interesting essays. Sashi's last essay in the book is about a very well-known publisher and friend of writers over the years, Mr. P Lal, who also published her first collection. Could you share with us some of your memories about him and that first collection and how it came to be?
Yeah, I think P Lal was an institution in Indian writing in English. I didn't know about him. Some professor told me, when my father was telling me, get your stories published, and this professor told me that you can write to P Lal, and I wrote to him. And he said, send your stories. I sent my stories. And then he wrote back and said that, will you buy 100 copies? I said, no, I don't have the money to buy 100 copies. I said, I can pay for the postage, I can pay for paper, and I can pay for ink, but I cannot pay for anything else. So the next letter said, oh, I'm so enthused about your stories, I'm going to publish all of them, and I'm going to write a blurb myself, which I almost never do. So that was the beginning. He was so encouraging. I wish young writers would get somebody like that. But he was very particular about good writing. He did publish bad writing. There's a lot of people say that he did it for commercial purposes, but he had to survive. And at the same time, he did publish many good writers. I think Vikram Seth started with him. Anita Desai started with him. Ruskin Bond was there. I think he had a whole long list of people who became eminent afterwards. So he was quite a phenomenon, I think. And his letters, they're like treasures, his handwriting, so beautiful, and his language, so wonderful. So for me, the kind of encouragement I got from him, nobody has ever given me until now, except my husband, and that is not as a writer, that is as a wife. So, his encouragement was a whole lot to me.
Your father was a very well-known writer in Kannada and Sanskrit. Yeah. Nothing from him in the early years?
No, I think... I don't know. He was very happy when I began writing, and he sort of, read my novels, first 2 novels. He was alive then. And he told his friends they were wonderful novels, and he never told me. So that was the kind of relationship we had, which was not very articulate. So he didn't. But anyway, he did tell me that, you should get your stories published, put them together. And he took me to R.K. Narayan. And Narayan, we gave the stories to him to read. And after 3 months, he sent them back saying, I don't get time. Now I understand what he meant. I was a bit cheesed off then. And then we went to Anandmurthy, and he also promised, and he didn't write. So, I learned a lot in that first thing, that don't go to people. People come to me for forwards and introductions. They don't need anything. Your work can stand on its own. So ultimately they came out because of Lal, the stories.
In one of the essays in the collection, you talk about being in holidays at a father's friend's house where you discover a library and start reading, and then you're dying to finish the book, but they're like, it's time to go and so forth. Could you sort of share that with us?
Yeah, it was not a library. My father's friend's wife had a hysterectomy. So we went to the hospital to see her. And this friend of my father's was an English teacher and a great reader, English reader, which there were not many of them in Dharwad. So there was a book lying there, and I started reading it. And, I didn't participate in the conversation at all. My job was to be there. So by the time they were ready to leave, I had to so reluctantly leave that book and go. And thankfully, some years later, I found the book and finished it. So,
So the starting of reading and the role of reading for not just a writer, but for people today. I'd love your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I'm a great champion of reading. And I'm astonished that young people nowadays seem to write without reading. And I think there's no school for writing like reading. You want to learn about writing, read. Luckily I was on my own. I was a great reader. I read in spite of people, not because anyone told me to read. In fact, I was barred from the library because my father told the teachers, don't give her library book, she's not studying. But, it became a habit, it became a passion, it became an obsession. And I think I owe my being a writer they were sort of connected. I was told that you're wasting your time reading all this stuff. I don't think so. I think I was preparing myself to become a writer. So to me, reading later was a school where I learned about writing. The narration, the language, everything. I read people like Charles Dickens and the Bronte sisters and all the classical writers of those times. I think I was immensely lucky that I began reading with them. And learned such a lot from those books. I think for everyone, not only for a writer, for anyone, I think reading expands your world. It expands your heart. It expands your horizon. You come to know the kind of people there are in the world. You come to know that you are not the only person who's having, sometimes you have some feelings which you're ashamed of. You think, oh God, what am I thinking of? But you read that somebody has those feelings. I think it knits you into the world. Reading. I think it's an immense blessing. And I think I learned about what a blessing it is during the lockdown. I was never bored. Never bored. I was constantly reading, and now I have a Kindle, so I don't have to go out to get books. So I think it's amazing, what reading can take you into so many worlds. It can give you so much. And I think to read is one of the greatest, for me at least, one of the most wonderful things in life.
Besides Dickens and the Bronte sisters, any other of your earlier influences and then perhaps even later influences?
Jane Austen. She was a huge influence, the austerity of her language, the sparseness of her style, the complete, dryness with which she could make something humorous. She is amazing. So I think she was the greatest influence on me. Dickens too, I loved his language. He's very florid. Dickens' language is florid, but that's it. That's the beauty of it. I just loved. I read Trollope a lot much later. And I thought, this man could have been a great writer if Dickens hadn't been there at the same time. Because Dickens was so much better at that long storytelling. And, so I think these Bronte sisters, Emily Bronte, she was a genius and a miracle. I really loved that Wuthering Heights. So I was lucky to get all these books to read.
And coming to your writing, you've obviously written in several genres. How does a novel form versus a short story for you?
Short stories are what I began with. I wanted to write a novel. There came a stage when I was a little impatient with the short story because I thought that I need more space. I need more leg room. I have to develop some ideas. In a short story, you have no place to develop ideas. So I started, thinking of writing a novel, and I planned it out. It didn't work at all. I can't plan novels. Even a short story you cannot plan. And I'm that kind of a writer. So when I started writing novels, the space that it gave me was so wonderful, I forgot about the short story. And now, at this stage in my life, I seem to be going back to the short story, maybe because I do not have enough energy or maybe time for a novel. So, I'm enjoying going back to short stories, but I don't have that same fire at this age.
There's also a wonderful chapter on poetry. I'd love for you to share your thoughts on what you think of poetry, even though you don't write so much of it.
I don't write poetry at all. I mean, the world should be grateful to me that I don't write poetry. Because I had one novel in which one of the characters, a dead character, is a poet, and I tried to write her poetry, and it was so shamefully bad. Then finally I caught hold of a poet, Pratibha. She wrote them for me, and what a difference that was. So when I started writing my memoirs, Listen to Me, it was amazing the poetry which came back to me. What I had read in my class, in my classrooms, I thought I'm not a poetry person, but it was amazing how poetry stays with you. Prose does not stay the same way with you. The other day, what was it that I was watching? I was watching this funeral of, Rawat. And the drum beats, the soldiers, that sort of monotonous drum beat. And I was remembering that poem on the death of Sir John, something at Corona. It has the same beat. The poetry is about a dead military man in Spain, an Englishman, and his body is being taken away, and they're doing it silently because their enemy is around. And, that poetry has exactly the same beat. And I think poetry is amazing what it does with language. I've read some of the old poems. There's this poem, Fantasies of a Love Thief, 11th century or something like that, Bilana. But poetry, it struck me like it was quite amazing. So poetry, I'm not a great reader, but whenever I read good poetry, it gives me a kind of a joy, which even prose cannot give me.
From there, I'd like you to share with us about an essay that you have in this collection called Macaulay's People, about writing in English.
Oh, Macaulay's People.
Yeah, Macaulay's People.
Okay, yeah.
Just if you would tell us more.
Writing in English is a queer phenomenon. We can sit in a place like this and talk about writing in English and talk. Writers in English can talk. But, when I see the vigor of the language literatures, the way they sort of are deeply into it, the way they debate and argue, and they have a lot of readers. Our readers are kind of spread out too much, so we do not get that same interaction. I remember my father, one of the Kannada friends we have is greatly interested in Kannada literature. He said, one day I was standing, and just a few feet away, your father and another writer were standing, and he said, and I thought, my God, I'm on the same piece of ground that they are. That kind of worship which you don't have in English. In a way, it's good. But at the same time, English is also very much looked down upon by the language writers. They're sort of very skeptical, very contemptuous. For some time, it was a really bad kind of a feeling. And I remember I had to battle a lot of it because your father writes in Kannada. Why are you writing in English? And it was sort of, very hard to put up with that kind of a thing. So I think there are different worlds. The Kannada world is different. The English literary world is different. And yet when you meet writers face to face, it's all, the same. You have the same concerns, you have the same problems, you have the same, ideas, but it's only that they think that English is a foreign language. So therefore, I've been sort of, on both sides. I think I'm one of the very few, because I have come from a background where my father was a Kannada writer. He was also a Sanskrit scholar. My mother was 100% Marathi. And my earliest language for me and my sister was Marathi. So I can read both Marathi and Kannada. I can't write them. But I knew those words. And I was familiar with the writers, familiar with, what is happening. It was very important for me to know what is happening in those literatures. I wanted that link. I didn't know where I belonged because the kind of writer I was sitting at home and writing was not one of those glamorous writers and, lived abroad and published abroad and all that. I was here and I was writing about here. So I wanted to know what's happening in the other languages, which are also about here. So, that I had friends in the other languages. I had Dr. Anupama, who was my window to the Kannada literature, Pratibha Nandakumar, Marathi literature. I have some friends. Gauri Deshpande was one of them. So for me, I've never had this feeling that I'm an English writer. I just think of myself as a writer who writes in English.
But in a way, you're sort of representative of melding of both those worlds, like you've just said.
I don't think one can represent anything. I'm
not represent, but perhaps, you engaged in both those worlds, as you just spoke. In your translation work of Kannada.
Very little, Ranveer. I haven't done much because my Kannada is not very good. I translated my father's translation of the Natya Shastra into English. He died leaving 5 chapters unwritten, undone. So my mother wanted me to translate those 5 chapters. So the Natya Shastra, as it is, it's a very difficult job. It's highly technical, it's highly boring, it's highly repetitious. But I did it, and that was really my first attempt. It was as if my father was cheering me on, saying, do it, you can do it. So I did it. Of course, I took help from other translations. But, it was not easy because Kannada is not my language. What I mean.
So this brings me to the next question. A lot of us in India speak originally 2 or 3 languages because either we've gone to English school or our mother tongue, or if, you're Gujarati and I live, for instance, in Tamil Nadu, friends who live here in Kannada, friends who've lived in Bengal. How do this sort of polylingual world, which in a way allows us to be more appreciative of languages, sounds, rhythms, is now, I'm sensing, getting more and more politicized. You're only learning a sort of chauvinism in the world of language. Language itself is getting politicized. How can we stay away from this? What would you as a writer suggest for, say, curriculum, how kids can be raised without just learning English?
Yeah, as I said, it's totally political. They're all fighting to be a classical language now. I don't understand. We knew a very great Kannada scholar. He was a philologist, dictionary maker. Yeah,
yes,
he made Kannada dictionaries, and he used to say, what is the use of all this? They don't have good Kannada teachers, So I think the languages are not taught well enough. They are only used by people who want to have some kind of, a stick to beat people with. Like in Bangalore, outsider thing. My driver used to say, Amma or Kannada Barodilla, or Kannada Barodilla. In such contempt. What do you do about it? So, because people, I've ended with that one quotation from a book on Maratha history, where it is written about all the, I can't quote it, I'll have to go and waste time on that. But, it's the kind of languages which people in the Deccan spoke. Dakhni language, they call it. They were called the Dakhnis. The Muslims, they brought Urdu, they brought Persian, and then they had the Kannada of their places, Marathi, Telugu. This all mixed together. And I think that is something which we need to go back to. But I don't see how we can. And, writers are very poor at doing anything. I can write, but ask me to, somebody rang me up yesterday and said, would you promote something? I said, I can't even promote myself. What am I going to promote? I said, the most I'll buy some 10 books from you and that's it. So I think writers are no good. I don't know, people like you who are deeply interested in all this and who have these organizational skills. I would explain.
I don't know about that. But we'll go from that to the title of this collection of essays. What led it to be called Subversions?
I think it was Kartika, my editor, So I wanted to call it a balancing act. One of the essays is that. And she said, you're not balancing at all. You're totally subversive. You've gone to the edge of along that road, you've gone to the very edge, and you're not worried about balancing yourself. So I thought it was a very good idea. And then I got that epitaph from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the American justice. It's so amazing, that thing, so our dissent is very much talked about now. So dissent, we decided not to use dissent, and we used subversion instead. And also I came across this quotation by this American science fiction writer called Ursula Le Guin, and she says that to write from a woman's experiences and to use a woman's judgment is the most subversive act of all. Now, I was stunned by that sentence. From beginning to think that, my God, they're going to look at this as a woman writer stuff, and then I was also told, why don't you give it to a women's magazine, etc., etc. Being constantly snubbed, looked down upon, and, made to feel small. And here I find this woman so bravely and boldly saying it's a subversive act. If I should have known it 30 years ago. So
because you had this problem of being labeled as woman writer.
Woman writer writing about women.
Yes.
So that I had to fight against it. Ultimately, it was Virginia Woolf's Room of One's Own which helped me out of that. When I read her Room of One's Own, I really realized what my writing is, and there's no such thing as women's writing. So there is, but it's just different. It has its own strengths. So, but people still kept on, snubbing, and I was always kept aside. It didn't matter anymore.
So, subversions, dissent, as you say, what would you say is the role of the writer, and through her work, how is she politically involved?
I think that's a very tricky question. That's something we talk about all the time. And one of my friends said that we can't write straight. We have to write it slant. You have to make it sarcastic. You have to make it, cover it up, your criticism. But then will anyone get it? That's the thing. And I don't think writers in India have that power anymore to move people, which they did. I mean, people like Shivram Karant or my father, they had great power when people looked up to them, read them, and, they could make a difference. I don't think today any language people are like that. English is even worse, because the kind of people we are talking to, I remember once we had a kind of a seminar in the British Library about women or something. And I, after listening to others, I said, what are we doing talking here in this very air-conditioned place, all of us very privileged women, talking about other women? It doesn't reach anyone. So, I think it's very hard for women writers to become activists. Your activism is in your writing. That's it. I mean, and I think ultimately, maybe perhaps it does count. I hope.
You also talk about a general role of the arts, of people in the creative world, and their role in creating islands, bubbles of beauty in difficult realities of contextual time over history. Why is that so important? And why is that important even now, or more so now?
In fact, for me, that was one of the very important questions which troubled me, because literature, art, was always less important than things like politics and economics. And I would find every male saying, I don't read fiction, because fiction is not, it's just entertainment. And I thought that's not true. I mean, fiction is more profound, fiction lasts longer. And, I've been thinking about this, that why do we create things of beauty? Like why did human beings start singing? Why did they do it in rhyme? Why did they make cups and whatever in beautiful shapes? Why did they make such beautiful textiles? Because beauty is a part of us. You see a little child, and the child will be singing and dancing. He loves that rhyme, he loves that rhythm. That's part of us, it's in our genes. And to say that, it's less important, to me, is like denying ourselves, denying the best of ourselves. So I have felt very strongly about this, that literature, art, etc. are essential to life. It's not just that they're there to entertain you when you're bored. It's not just that they're there to pass the time, but they are there as part of our creation, part of our creativity. Creativity is the most important thing in the world. And if we do not appreciate and if we do not respect creativity, we are lesser human beings. Look at any kind of art. In fact, I was just thinking that, okay, all of us are puzzling about this question of existence. Why am I existing? What am I doing here? What is my life all about? And you will find that religion gives you certain answers. Philosophers will give you certain answers. Maybe mathematicians will give you answers. Scientists will give you certain answers. But for a writer, the answer is never definite. You go on doubting, you go on asking questions, there's never any answer. And I think that is the beauty of literature, that even the reader will enter into it and ask questions of herself or himself. So I think this Ursula Le Guin says that reading is like listening. It is. You're in communion with the writer, and you're having a conversation with the writer. So I think, therefore, you're having a conversation on serious matters, which you don't do in real life. There's very few people with whom you can talk about profound subjects. So I think there is where, art matters, literature matters, every bit of art matters.
And again, coming back to this labeling of women artists, women writers, this whole classifying by gender, don't you think it's really annoying and not necessary?
It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. I mean, when I sit at my table and I write, I'm a writer.
Yeah.
I mean, my gender is not there in the picture at all. Nor is a man when he's sitting at his table and writing, a male writer. But nobody says male writer. It's writer is writer, man. Woman writer is a woman writing. So, these kind of things have been things which have been great irritants in my writing life. And I think I've wasted a lot of time on battling them. I should have, because people never learn. Even now, even after all that I've said, the other day I had a question from a journalist saying, don't you think that you write about women? Don't you think your writing is very limited because you write about women? And I wanted to ask her, do you ever ask a man, isn't your writing limited because you write only about men? Nobody will ask a man that question. It's the norm. So I think the more you think of it, the more absurd it becomes,
From that, moving on to your take on feminism or your feminism, or how has it served you, your perspective of it?
I think I came upon feminism in the 70s. That was an exciting time. I think it started, of course, in America. And I think there was a lot of kind of turmoil there at that time, Vietnam, all kinds of things. And feminism was one of it, but feminism was not understood. It was ridiculed. In India, for me, it was what was happening in India. The feminism in India was what mattered. And it came to me through this case about a young tribal girl who was raped in a police station in Thane. She was called by the police with her boyfriend to answer some questions. They let that man go, kept her, and the two policemen raped her. And the High Court said it was rape. So the government went to the Supreme Court, which said that woman had she was a girl, not even a woman, a tribal working girl. They said she has no marks of injuries on her body. Therefore, she submitted, it's a voluntary submission. It was not rape, and they were acquitted. And I remember the 4 law teachers wrote a long letter to the Supreme Court, an open letter, questioning this idea of submission and questioning this idea of, making the woman prove that she is, not a rapist. So that really caught me, and I got into that. Then I got into the group called Vimochana, which is in Bangalore, still there. I didn't actively work, but I was very interested, involved in what they were doing. And that was the dowry deaths time. And I think a lot of them spent a lot of time in hospitals with these, with the burnt women. And, it was absolutely horrendous what was happening. So for me, it was not that feminism was battling against men. Feminism was fighting the conditions which make women, don't deprive women of opportunities, deprive them of living a dignified life, deprive them of choices. And I think for me, feminism is about choices, it's about opportunities, and it's about having their right to live in this world as freely as any other human being. And no human being is completely free. We are all tied to other people. We all have responsibilities. But whatever freedom is possible, every individual should have it, man or woman. That's my idea of feminism.
To lighter matters then.
Okay.
You came to Bangalore as a young lady and have made it your home. There are a couple of essays about mapping Bangalore, the different houses you lived in. Tell us about, over the years, how your relationship was with Bangalore of then, later, and now, and this new globalized Bangalore.
I came to Bangalore from Bombay, and Bombay was even then a very fast city. And in Bangalore, when I got up before the bus stop, the conductor would say, Kutkulli, yakish bega yeltira. So then Nidhana was another word which I came to know very. So it was a completely different city. And I'm enjoying the thought of it now. At that time, I wasn't enjoying it very much. But it was very slow, and it was kind of a small town atmosphere. So there's something very nice about it. You know, I can't even describe it, that the original Bangalore person who ate idli dosa and read the Deccan Herald and drank his coffee, those people were there, and, you know, little groups standing and talking, and little groups waiting for the buses to take them to ITI or, you know, HL or wherever they were working. So that Bangalore was just beginning to grow. And I got married and went away to Bombay and lived there again for about 15 years and came back. And this Bangalore seemed to me a very different Bangalore, because for the first time in Malleshwaram, where we lived, where we had huge bungalows, everybody was a Raja or a Zamindar. There we found, you know, multi-storied apartments coming up, where we had 2 cars on that road. We knew whose cars they were. We knew what time they would go. Oh, there's Dr. Shivaram going, kind of a thing. Now we had so many cars, so many people we didn't know anything about. And then, you know, I got married and came back, and we were living in Nimmans, and that was a Bangalore I had never seen at all. So I was sort of discovering so many facets. We moved many times in Bangalore, came to know a lot about Bangalore, except in the cantonment area where I never lived. And the latest Bangalore has become very intimidating. This is what I have a feeling. There are a lot of young people, it's wonderful. And as Ranveer says, so much is happening. I think that's absolutely wonderful. But more and more I find that, you know, people are losing, older people are finding no place here. You can't even cross the road, you know.
Do you think that's true in major cities in India now?
All major cities, but, you know, I mean, I see them here. And I see old couples standing, holding hands, you know, to give themselves courage and just waiting to cross the road. It fills me with a lot of compassion, you know, and I think that it's not a homely place anymore. It doesn't have that. I remember when many years back, when my friend and I were trying to cross near Magistrate, that policeman said, wait, Sarbanili, and he stopped all the cars and said, Hogi. You know, I mean, you won't find that in Bangalore now today. It was so different. So this is a loss. I mean, we have now a glittering cosmopolitan city, but not all of us are comfortable in it. And I think particularly for the old, who have lived, middle-class people who have lived, built a house, you know, all these houses are like, lived there and their children have gone away. And, you know, I see a sad Bangalore in Jayanagar, in, you know, Baswangudi. See that part of it. It's like people have lost their place.
What about a community of writer friends that you continue to engage with in the city?
Yeah, I do have some, not many, but, you know, we can't meet now. That's the problem with the city. We just cannot meet. We can only talk on the phone. So we used to have wonderful times, you know, we used to meet in somebody's house and have lovely food and wine and talk about books and, you know, despise publishers and all the kind of things which writers do when they're left to themselves. Now we don't meet at all. It's all the past now.
Can we share a few things about some of the writers on which you have written essays? I'm particularly interested in the one you had mentioned earlier on Gauri Deshpande and her translation work.
Yeah. Well, she was a very unusual woman, unusual writer, and she died very early, unfortunately. And she did a lot of translation from English into Marathi. She translated Arabian Nights, the entire original Arabian Nights. I think it was 16 volumes or something into Marathi. And she wrote an article about it in the magazine called, which was it in Subhashri's thing in Chennai?
Indian Review of Books.
Indian Review of Books. I think one of the best articles on translation that I've ever read. It is totally a hands-on kind of a thing. She's not talking about any theories. She's just telling us what came to her mind as she translated that. And her comments on Richard Burton, her comments on, how women are talked about as crazy, lustful people. It was a poor society. Arabian society, very poor society, and the whole thing is kind of such a fantasy, including the women. So, she has written very beautifully about that, and she also translated A Story of Mine. So I remember when she wrote to me telling me something about the time sequence. It wasn't right, she said, so I had to go back, think it over, and I thought, my God, this woman is a tough one. I had to really going back think into that thing and give her the correct time sequence, after which she translated it.
So the world of translation, what are its challenges, excitements?
Excitement is always being able to translate something which you very much want to translate. Not a commissioned piece, I think, Like I translated my father's memoirs and I read it. There's some pieces about the Marathi theatre, which was very alive at that time, and about some actors whom he loved. They were so wonderful, those few passages. I said, I'm going to translate this. And for me, it was such a pleasure to translate that. But I wouldn't say that I would be able to do the same. So there are now, thankfully, more professional, more competent translators. And I do think translation is so hugely important in India. Indira is here and, I know the stories which come to. Imagine we would never be able to read them if they were not translated, So I think it's wonderful that there are good translators now, very good translators.
You talk about reading Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, and then you talk about reading his journal where he mentions essays and notes on what went into the making of it. You also just mentioned about Gauri's translation, reading about how that translation. Yeah. Do you think that it's kind of look into, as we would call it in today's language, the making of, behind the scenes? Does that take away from the magic of engaging with that piece of work, or does it allow you a better reading or a better understanding of that work?
I think a lot of writers don't want to meddle with the mystery of writing.
Exactly.
That's don't want to talk about it. Anita Desai is one of them. Never talks about it. For a long time, I never used to talk about it. Now, occasionally I do. But I enjoyed reading, Gauri's this thing about the Arabian Nights. I think it's quite rewarding to read about what goes on behind the scenes. But I think ultimately, that real mystery can never be put into words. There'll be always something lacking in that account.
You talked about Virginia Woolf earlier and her classic Room of Her Own, and there's a phrase of hers where she says, most writers are inheritors and originators. So do you see yourself as part of that continuum, sort of star in that galaxy, if I were to put it as a fanboy?
I don't know. I mean, it's up to the critics to do that job.
So what is your room? What is Shashi's Room of Her Own? What is your standard writing practice? Do you get up every day and post breakfast, sit down and write? Do you have hours that you keep for writing, or does it come in bits and bobs?
Well, things have changed. When my kids were young, I had to only write in the hours when they were at school. Now I have a lot of time, but I have less to write because I'm kind of finding it hard to work for longer hours now. And when I get up early morning and write until about 7. That's the time when you start the day. And you know what you're going to write the afternoon. So afternoon is the time when I really write. I used to write from about 6 to 8 hours a day. Now it's come down a lot. So, but it used to be always hard to find the time. Always interruptions. Because if you're at home, nobody thinks you're working. Phone calls and somebody wanting to come and see you. And it was so sad that a friend rang up and said, I'm coming to Bangalore. And my first thought would be, oh my God, I'm going to lose a day. So one was very selfish. So I never did anything else. I never shopped, I never socialized. I only wrote and looked after the family. And maybe occasionally went for a theater or,
But this book came about in the pandemic. Can you tell us about how the editors who were in different places and a little bit about them and how this book came to fruition?
There's this academic from Canada called Nancy Batty. So she has been working on my work, and she goes to Madurai American College. I've given all my manuscripts to them. So they have all the work of students come from everywhere who want to work on me. So Nancy was there. So then she said she finished writing on my novels, and she said, I want to write on your prose pieces. So we had met in Madurai, and then when I came back, I sent her everything I had on my hard disk. After that, she sort of started sorting them out. Then she got this German professor called Dieter Riemenschneider. He is a very India literature-oriented man. I'd met him many years ago in Germany. So the both of them got into it. And so between the three of us, they chose the pieces unless I objected to. And then, sort of sometimes they gave me an idea that maybe you should expand this. Like Macaulay's People. Dieter said, nobody's ever written about this before. So why don't you expand it? So I rewrote the whole thing, actually. So, during the lockdown, when we were sort of locked up in our houses, I worked very hard on that because rewriting is harder than writing. I can tell you that. So from Germany to Canada to India, it was a triangular correspondence going on. And we didn't even know whether we were going to get it published, who's going to publish it, etc., etc. But we just worked on it. And it worked. Somehow it worked. They did a great job. I really owe them a lot. And my Kartika, my editor for many years, took it up. So it was very satisfactory, especially that during the lockdown when things were so bleak, and spent the entire morning cleaning pots and pans and, doing all the jobs which two maids used to do. So, learned the value of those women, I think. I really treasure them now after those years. So doing this was so satisfying, to do work which I want to do. It was a wonderful opportunity.
Before we sort of finish and I open it up for questions from the floor, I've always been very curious, and you've never shared, and I've never had the opportunity to ask you about the kerfuffle, if I might call it, a kerfuffle that you had with Naipaul in the Jaipur Lit Festival.
No, not Jaipur.
Was it not Jaipur?
Nimrana.
Okay, sorry, my bad.
Yeah.
Please tell me what it was all about.
It wasn't much. It wasn't anything much. The media blew it up,
Even so.
All that happened was that he was snooty, no question about it.
Yes.
Quite a nasty old man, if you ask me. And, the only session he attended, they opened it to the media. They wanted them to see them. They put somebody next to him, I think Nayantara. He said, no, I don't want to. I want Amitabh Ghosh. Vikram said. He wanted the big ones around him. So he had his way in everything. Then he said he's not going to talk first. Amitabh was in the chair. So he said he'll talk later. So I think, I don't forget who spoke first, and then Nayantara spoke about colonialism, and then I was supposed to talk, and I spoke about, I think, feminism. He said, life is too short, I can't bear to listen to these banalities. It burst out with that. And nobody said a word. Whenever I think of that, I think of Anand Murthy, all the big shot writers from all the languages sitting there. Didn't say a word to that man when he burst against us. He was so nasty to us. And I thought this was just like Draupadi and the Pandavas, all those Kauravas sitting there without a word, Bhishma, etc. And ultimately one young man got up and said, you're a nasty old man, he told him. So he didn't know who we were. Then they told him that Nayantara is Jawaharlal Nehru's niece. He went and apologized to her. Obviously, I didn't matter. Not that I wanted his apology anyway, because, what do you do with that kind of a person? So that was it. That was all that there was to it.
Are you working on a new work as we speak?
No.
You said something about short stories.
Yeah, I'm
playing with the idea.
Yeah, I don't know.
You don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So I've kind of exhausted my list of questions for Shashi. Is there anything you would like to share that you think I missed out on?
I think you have done a great job.
Thank you very much. That made my day, week, year, month. I'll open it up. She's going to respond to them. So,
What a wonderful session. Thank you so much. And thank you, Ranveer, such nice questions. But thank you so much for sharing how you feel and think so openly. It's really wonderful. I wanted to compliment you on the cover. It's such an interesting cover. It really has multiple layers of story there. So I think it's
actual embroidery.
Yeah, it's so nice. Now, one frivolous comment and one relevant comment, I suppose. One is, I feel sort of sad that you didn't become a model for a pen or something. You'd be the first writer, I think, in India who would have been given that opportunity if you were going to stand for a advertising campaign or something like that. So that was just a silly comment. But apropos thinking about your writing and as you put these essays together, obviously they've been developed over a long period of time.
Yeah.
But I recognize, I suppose, that as a writer, you're thinking about writing and writers and reading all the time in a way.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you what you are reading now and what you're reflecting upon right now in this very strange period of the pandemic that we've been through. Is there anything particular, or are you just open to everything that you're reading as always?
I've not been able to read anything satisfactory. You know, I sort of start and give up. I think it's partly to do with age. And a lot of people who are roughly my age, maybe younger, say that they prefer to go to rereading, you know, old favorites. And that's what I am doing. So it's something which, you know, I don't know why I read about books. I read a lot about books, but I'm not able to get into those books somehow. Some kind of a distancing, maybe, I don't know. And a lot of young people's books are, you know, difficult for me to get into. So I'm waiting. You know, last book I really enjoyed, like Anne Patchett. I love her writing and want to go back to her writing. Anne Tyler I used to love, but last few novels, she's sort of, you know, kind of fading away. I can see that. So it's very, very difficult for me to find a book which I really sort of grasp with. Maybe it's my fault that, you know, I don't have that same intense joy now, you know, which you have when you're younger. You know, the kind of joy I felt about books is kind of tempered down now. So it's sad, but that's life.
Yes.
What do you think about novels in particular, which are then converted into films? And particularly now with Netflix and others going around, what is your take on that? I don't think any of your novels has been made into a film, as far as I know. So what would you think about that?
I think they're two completely different mediums. And I think a good book does not necessarily make a good novel. I've almost never sort of seen a movie which is as good as a novel. Or sometimes the movie may be better also. I remember, you know, Gone with the Wind as being the one book which I thought made a very successful movie. I'm not very keen on anyone, doing movies. I remember Girish Karnad had come to me and said he wanted to make a movie of one of my crime novellas. And he gave me an advance, 2,000 rupees. And he said, anyone comes to you, you take advance from them. And also write down there that if they don't do it in a year, you keep the money. So that's how it has been most of the time. I am not very keen either because they distort. It's a different medium. It requires a different approach altogether. So I can't hold on to my novel and say, this is not my novel. So I have to be prepared for that, which I am not. So I'm happy that there's no movie.
But the first time we met was when there was a dramatized reading by the Bangalore Little Theatre Company in Chennai.
Yeah. That was the Hyderabad group.
Hyderabad
Yes,
group.
Sorry, well, that was done very well. And there was also a group which took 3 of my stories of women from mythology and made, kind of a series of, enacted them using dance. It was very well done. They had Sita, they had Draupadi, and then they had Kunti. It came out very well. So I think theatre maybe is better. Film is very difficult, I think.
All right, then on that note, thank you very much. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Shashi, for that very wonderful sharing and for creating the time and having driven across town for spending this wonderful evening with us. Thank you.